Good afternoon, it's Lee Cassidy from Tactile Technology. What I'm going to do today is to give you a quick demonstration of what you can do with Pentera doing a black box test. So, for those who haven't seen a black box test before, it's where you don't give it any credentials. So, it's as if it's trying to find the credentials itself. So, we're going to kick off doing that. And what we're going to do after about 10 minutes, we're going to put some credentials in and see how quickly it picks up some information about the vulnerabilities and what can be actually utilized on the network. We've got a fixed number, but we're going to start from the beginning and get the whole thing set up. So if I share my screen with you, I'm just going to get rid of the background because I don't really want that background on there. I normally take that off before we start live. So what you can see on the screen at the moment, you've got a couple of activities that have been run in the past, some test scenarios. We can also look at the testing history and we can look at what tests have been run previously. But what we're going to go is back to testing scenarios and we're going to click new and we're going to pick a black box test to start with. We could also do a grey box, which is providing some credentials, so low level credentials at the beginning, and seeing how it would find its way onto systems across the network, as if a user had actually compromised their credentials in some way by a phishing attack or some social engineer or something like that. And then we've got some targeted testing that could be anything, including something like a ransomware attack and actually setting up a machines to see if you could actually ransomware them. But it's all done in a safe manner, so there's no way that any of the machines could be compromised in reality. It's just effectively going through a simulation to identify where the vulnerabilities are, but how impactful those vulnerabilities are. Because if you can't exploit a vulnerability, it doesn't really matter how high the CVSS score is for it, because if it can't be exploited, it's not going to be used. It doesn't matter. So the idea with Pentera is to do regular testing, but do it in such a way as you actually identify areas that you need to put work in. And again, it's fully automated. So we're going to start off with our pen test. And the first thing I'm going to do is give it a name. So this is a demo black box so that you can see what it is. Black box with pivots to grey. So we're going to do that around about 10 minutes into the actual test. The next thing we can do is set the ranges. I'm going to upload a file to do this. So I'm going to pick a particular file that I've downloaded, which has got the addresses I want to use in it. And those have been added onto the system now. And I'm going to upload those. In fact, no, cancel. So I've got those included on there. Further down, I can do things like change the attack service selection. I can do things like a dynamic attack node, so an additional node that I can use for attack. And for this, I'm going to reduce it to 1 hour because I'm going to do about 30 minutes today, but I'm only going to do about the first 10 minutes of black box. Then I'm going to swap it over after that. And I can also specify to do a rescan at some stage in the future. So I can specify in 12 hours to do a rescan, but for this particular test, I'm not going to. The next thing is how stealthy I'm going to be. So if I leave it in the middle, this will be like a hacker who's trying to keep things quiet, but trying to find and exploit the network. And should be able to see with any of our EDR tools, pick that up on there. We can go more stealthy, so it's even more difficult to identify. And if we want to be noisy, we can actually put the other end where we're doing beacon attempts and things on the network. So it'd be quite obvious what we're doing on the network if we went to that level. But we're going to stay, with the settings we've got in the center. And then these are some of the things we want to do. So one is allow exploits of things it finds, but require approval. But I'm going to untick that because I want it to carry on doing as much as it can when it sees them. There are some other pieces we can use on there around using password cracking, custom dictionary and things like that. But this has given us a good setup to start off with. And what I could do is I could schedule the start of this, but what I'm going to do now is create and run. So that scenario has been created and it's kicking off now. So that's testing scenario is starting. So it'll take a little while for it to kick off, and then what we'll do is start to see some information. So key things are down this left-hand side. We'll see as it gets on any achievements it's found. On the right-hand side, we'll see vulnerabilities and achievements that have been stacked up by numbers. But the left-hand side, it will actually give us effectively a priority list of the different activities it's found and achievements. So straight away, we started to see machines appear. So it's actually looking on the network and it's identifying machines. So it's discovering hosts. It's trying to relay details. It's sniffing the network for credentials and trying to find any credentials it can find on the network. And it's looking for any services it can identify on the network as well. So different type of web services and other services that could be exploitable on the system. So we'll just leave it running for a little while and eventually we'll start to see some information. So we've already found one machine. So it's found an SMTP server on the system and it's starting to identify more information about that. And currently we don't have any achievements at the moment, but we're getting there. So what I'm going to do is start it to see some data on the network because I'm going to, as a user, effectively put in some details that forces an SMB lookup. So I've forced an SMB lookup with a machine that I've got on the network, which is a Windows 10 machine, and we're going to see what it's picked up from that. And we can see now a number of machines it's identified, and it's starting to identify more. So we've got a Windows 2012 server, it's found a 2019 server, another 2019, and we found some Windows 10 servers on the network as well. These are all virtual machines in our lab environment, so we can see those. We can see numbers adding up now against workstations and servers. For this test, we've intentionally not include any Linux servers, but again, Linux servers could be incorporated in there and it'll do the same thing. It'll identify any vulnerabilities on the system based on the particular version of the operating system, the particular patch level on that particular machine, and it'll also look at any specific exploits for the operating system or any of the software that's loaded on there. It's also going to look for open ports and many other things it can find on those systems and start to identify issues. So straight away, we've got 15 now vulnerabilities it's identified on there. So we've started to get somewhere. So if I look at vulnerabilities, we can see things like SMB messaging signing is disabled. We've got host supports SMB version 1 protocol, which should be disabled. And we've also got some closed ports on hosts. And we've got some remediation activities as well. So here we can see enable SMB sign-in by group policy, and it's going to give us the details on how we can actually do that. It's talking about disabling support for SMB version 1, again, on all Windows hosts on the network. And also, if closed ports are reachable through the firewall, they can be abused. And it's talking about how we can block those ports. So, quite a bit of information already, and we've only just kicked off. So we've got 7 key devices identified, and we've just found now a CVE for one of those machines, which is 2021 40438, a specific vulnerability. And we've already got some achievements starting to appear. We've got 2 of them. So we've got 2 particular hosts. We've identified some achievements, which is finding web services that are available on those machines. And we can also see particular ports are open. So 8443 on this one. So we've actually got the 443 SSL port actually being renumbered to 8443 because a lot of people seem to think if you just put a different number to that port, it's not going to be available for the hackers. But that's quite different. So we're identifying some more vulnerabilities. Our highest one so far is we've got closed ports on 2.3. I mentioned earlier we've got SMB messaging sign-ins disabled at the moment, so we've got a number of machines there. So we're just waiting to see what else it can find. And if we go back to this stage again, we can see the type of activity that it's carrying out at the moment. So how long have we been running now? About 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do now is one of the things we can do is add in users. So we've got users at the top here, and we can do a user input, and I can put in some domain credentials. So what I'm going to do is add in some domain credentials. So the user I've got is Lee admin. I'm going to type in the password, just copying the details down, and I can also put in the domain. So I'm going to submit those into the system. So now it can actually utilize those credentials part of the attack scenarios it's going on with. So we just wait a little while and see what changes with the attack. So we can see some approvals coming up. Inject Spring for shell, and I'm going to approve those. And we've also got on a different machine, I'm going to approve that. So if I go to all approvals, it's going to tell me any approvals that are actually pending at the moment. I've just said yes to those 2 approvals, so they're already kicked off, and it's actually doing those attacks already. So it's kicked those off. On the left-hand side here, we can now see that I've put those credentials in there. We can see the details of them. So again, now it's actually turned into a grey box attack, and we're actually working towards a grey box using some credentials that have been found. It could have been that these were, like I say, gathered from a phishing attack. They could have been gathered through social engineering, or some other kind of drive-by or other attack. But because we've got those, we're now starting to test heavily using those credentials and seeing what level we can get, and what vulnerabilities we can identify on the back of that. Again, where you can see a particular machine flashing, so we can see at the moment this Win 2019 machine's flashing, and this second Win 2019 server is flashing. It's actually now trying some specific exploits against those, and we can see some of the current activity at the top here, so we can see all the different pieces. One thing that's really interesting is that across the top here we've got MITRE. If we click MITRE, we can actually see how far we've got along the MITRE framework with some of these attacks. So we can see, attack scanning, attack IP blocks, vulnerability scanning, gathering victims' network details. We've got all that. We're seeing some pieces around exploiting the public network, exploitations of the client. So we're moving all the way across up to the point where we're actually looking at collecting information about the systems as well. So this is much greater depth than you would see if you were doing a traditional pen test, where it would all be in this reconnaissance area, whereas now we're actually exploiting the system, where I've got initial access on machines and moving forward with it. So I'll go back to live information. Again, we've still got about 15 vulnerabilities have been identified, and we've also got 6 low-level achievements at the moment. Normally it takes around about 30 minutes to 45 minutes before we get to the point where we get something reasonably high. But it's working towards that, and we'll see more and more pieces come up. I'll just check for any more approvals. We've got no more approvals, so we're okay at that point. We've also got an actions log, so we can actually see everything that's happened on the system logged. So we can see all the different things, general web application scanning. We can see, any of the information that it's captured and what it's doing with that information afterwards. So we've detected Spring for shell as a CVE, so that can be utilized to actually carry out an attack. So it's kicked off execution of that on the machines it's found that vulnerability. It's also detected a Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, CVE 2022-41040, and again, it's doing initial access with that particular vulnerability, so it's moving forward with the attack. There is always going to be a limit to what we can actually show in a 20-30 minute demonstration demonstration. But if we did what we call a value, or a one-day challenge, which is as long as you're interested in seeing this and have got an interest in this technology to actually protect your systems, normally in a day we can actually identify a very large number of vulnerabilities, but also see what the impact of those vulnerabilities are, including things like credential check-in. We can check the credential strength within your system against your Active Directory. We can also look at how we can actually capture credentials from the network and crack passwords. And we can also do things like look externally with some of your credentials and see what can be identified that's out there in the wild already. So lots of things we can do, including a simulated ransomware attack on some of your systems to see how vulnerable they are to a ransomware attack. And I think that's one of the big worries that most organizations have at the moment is, would we actually identify it before it started? Would we be able to stop or even recover from a ransomware attack? So this will give you a really good picture of what your capabilities are to identify, stop, and also recover from a ransomware attack, as well as many other vulnerabilities that could be used to impact your systems and collect data. So we've now got 15 vulnerabilities. We've got 8 achievements. Majority of the achievements are identifying things like services. So we've got a number of other services that have been identified on different machines that could be used as an attack vector on those machines. So quite quickly we're finding information about those systems. We've even got an IIS window, a web server that's been set up with a default page on there, and we can see where that machine is and the page that's been provided. So quite quickly we can see how the system is starting to identify and utilize information it can find on the net like a real hacker would, and then build on that, to see how far it can take it, not just, identify ports and things that are open and some basic vulnerability. It's actually making uses of vulnerabilities to actually identify an achievement that can be made from it. So a much greater use of that information. Hopefully that's given you a reasonable picture. So there's a limit to what I can do in 20 minutes, but I'm not sure many of you want to sit around for more than 20 minutes to see anything. If anybody's got any questions, you can put it in the comments and I'll answer any questions live. If not, if you put any comments on there later, what I'll do is answer any of those questions. If I need to go off and get some answers from Pentera, from our partner, I can do that as well. But also what I'll do is I'll revisit this video, this demonstration. I'll represent it later this week. So if you've missed it today, you can see it again. And also post a YouTube version of it on the system as well. So hopefully you'll get everything you need. So you can see quite quickly, on this live system, we've identified a number of systems, we've identified a number of vulnerabilities, we've captured some user data, and we've started to move quickly forward towards an attack. We've identified some key areas within the MITRE framework, including doing lateral movement between some machines, so remote services, and also some Windows remote desktop type lateral movement activity. And we've also exploited some remote code execution as well and remote services. So we can see quickly how far the actual user would have got in 20 minutes. And it's not a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop where we are at this point in time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then what I'll do is I'll get the report from that later. I'll just make sure there's no credentials or anything that we shouldn't have in there. So I might redact some information, but I also post that report up onto LinkedIn tomorrow, so you can actually see what's been achieved in a full hour of the actual solution running against those test bed systems. So hopefully it was of use for you today. I'd love to see you again. We're going to do something every Monday at 2:00. We're looking to do some PCR and credentials and ransomware in the near future. I just need to organize that, and I'll post that information up about when we're going to do those later this week. Thank you very much for your time today. And just a couple of things. If you do want to know more about what we can do with Pentera and actually look at your own systems and identify any key areas of vulnerability, but not just that, the ones that can be exploited, you can book a meeting using that URL there. Also, if you want to get my contact details, you can go to Linktree /Lee Cassidy, and you'll get my telephone number, email address, anything else you need to contact me. And again, there's a link there to book something in my diary if you want to have a chat about anything to do with what we've shown you today. So thank you very much for joining us. What I'm going to do is shut things down now, and then I will hopefully see you very soon. Thank you very much.